disturbed too much by the rest of the audience joining us. My name is Chris Allison. I'm Senior Program Manager at CTA. CTA is an international organisation jointly governed and staffed by Africa, Caribbean, Pacific States and the European Union. And we put this session together in a little bit of a contrast from some of the other sessions you've been seeing. We thought it'd be useful to show you a little bit more hands-on how people are using open data day to day, and in particular promoting the content and the messages of that data. So we'll be hearing first of all from Ulrich Batz, who will be running through a demonstration of Software Online to give you an idea of really what's involved on making open data available. So Ulrich's been working for ODI, the Open Data Institute, and without further ado, Ulrich, if you want to take the stage, we can carry on.
Thank you.
We'll then have a panel session where we will be joined by the Chief Technical Officer of Growing Intelligence, who will be talking about how data is being used to attract investment in African agriculture. Natasha Mambo to be talking about journalism, data journalism, how that's used to communicate data, together with Mchiri Nyagala from the Local Development Research Institute. And then we'll finish off with a presentation from Neelam Prasai of the International Food Policy Research Institute. And then the final part will be a question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Well, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here. Very pleased to see so many faces. I was expecting a very tiny, small room, but this is way more than expected. So I want to talk a bit. I'm going to show you a little bit around visualizing data, which is, you can think of it as a subset of communicating data. And I had a little bit of difficulty. I think you all come from various backgrounds. I had the challenge of how can I fit in everything, at once, and sort of pick people up who are maybe more advanced and people who are sort of use more simple tools. So, for example, who of you uses Microsoft Excel or another spreadsheet sort of daily to work with data and visualize it? I see most of you. So my strategy is here. I'm going to give you a lot of informations and pointers and hints that you can then, if you find them interesting, check out in your other time. And I'm sure, I want to make the slides available as easy as possible. So I'm sure Chris and the CTA can help you just disseminate that to everyone. In terms of what I wanted to do today is just quickly to see just a brief overview of data visualizations to show you a bit examples. I really think it's something you should see. A sense of what tools exist and sort of on what spectrum they are. And then lastly, I would like to demo and show you a tool that's really useful for publishing charts on the web. And it's called Data Wrapper, and I chose it for reasons that will become clear later on. So before we really start, I thought about, well, maybe we should ask this question: why do we visualize data? And instead of me answering, I would like you to spend 2 minutes with your neighbor and discussing this question. Also maybe introduce yourself if you don't know each other. So spend 2 minutes with your neighbor and just briefly discuss this question. I'm afraid I have to be the one who already cuts you off so we can use the times. Is someone brave enough to perhaps shout out what they have discussed? Pardon me?
Getting large amounts of data, understanding a large amount of data.
Yeah, that is a great reason to say, well, what if my spreadsheet has 20,000 rows? I can't look at them all, but I can create a visualization that summarizes and that allows me to understand. I have briefly sort of, this is not the ultimate list or classification, but just what you just said, efficiency, summarizing large amounts of data in a much smaller and more efficient way. This is an example using Spark lines, something that a data visualization pioneer, Edward Tufte, has sort of promoted. Spark lines are small word-like data visualizations. They exist in Excel, so if you're interested, I link an example here, and you can play around and see how what you can do with it. So that's one idea. Another one is exploratory. Sometimes you have, again, a lot of data. You don't really know what you're looking at, why you're doing it, and the example here I show is the Open Data Barometer, which I can also show you here. So the idea is that instead of a data dump, they provide you with this map, which has a default view of just the overall classification. You can see United Kingdom is doing very well with a perfect score of 100, the US is second. But you can also say, well, what if I'm interested in something like, let's say, company register. How open is the company register for data? Now this visualization allows me to explore that on a different level, and it has additional sort of charts and so forth later on. And you can see here, again, the idea of small data visualization that really aids the understanding. And then thirdly, another reason why we're doing visualization is to just explain things. And so this is a map of the UK to show how English or British people have voted in the Brexit referendum. It really tells you about, I want to tell you about the result, you know the result. But I think what I really want to point out here is note the amount of annotation they use. Note, for example, how the author zooms into London, because London is a small area on a map, and there's really a lot going on. And also, it's embellished with another little table as a data visualization. And really, I think it's a really good example of how a static visualization, this was published in the New York Times, a static visualization can work in an explanatory way. I'm going to whiz through a couple of examples because I think that's the easiest way to learn and sort of further your almost your library of what can be done with data. But first, does anyone recognize this map? It's a map of London. Yes?
It's the Broad Street pump map that identified a cholera epidemic in London.
Wonderful. That's exactly right. It's a famous visualization done by John Snow in 1854, where he mapped cases of cholera in London on this map, and you can see how a cluster is here on Broad Street, and then there's also the pump, and then the conclusion was, well, something's going on with the water. And I highlighted also the brewery, because it's a very interesting negative space. There are no or almost zero cases, and the legend has it that the people here were all drinking beer and avoiding the water. And I think the takeaway here is, for your visualization, it's very simple. It just has it really emphasizes the data. That's important. It emphasizes the data, and it's there's no clutter or other things here. History, I'm going to skip over this. Here are a few things what not to do. So perspective, this is the same chart. It looks completely different. You can see that? That's the 5 horizontal lines. It's the same chart, but the perspective screws it up. Comparing multiple lines can really distort, many things can distort your story or your data visualization. You can see here the difference is the same, but as they're charted in sort of parallel, it looks like different. The dangers of 2 y-axis, some people have very strong opinions on this, but the idea is just, you can choose the 2 axes in different ways to tell really different stories, and that's generally something to avoid. For example, here it goes from 0 to 5, 50, 0 to 50. Here it goes from 0 to 10. Here it doesn't even start at 0. Also, generally to be avoided. At axis, it doesn't start at 0. All these examples, by the way, come from a report called Best Practice Realization that I and some colleagues wrote for Open Data Manager. The link is here, so there's a lot more stuff in there. Open data, visualizations, and examples, and so forth. Area bias, so the idea is that a map easily distorts the importance of data. For example, on a world map, Russia always looks enormous, but that doesn't necessarily reflect the data. And so a way around is to use symbols on a map, or to use a cartogram, if you prefer, which is sort of a distorted map, and so forth. So maps can be very useful, can also sometimes be slightly misleading. A quick example here, which is from the Scottish government. This is a chart of how people use the internet, or how much. And I feel sorry for Scotland government because I use this example a lot to show what not to do. So again, like you've heard a few ideas from me. For example, emphasize the data, get rid of clutter, find like the one story. Spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes with your neighbor again. 1, discussing what is the key insight here. And then 2, how you would make the chart better. So I'll give you, let's say, 1 minute to discuss what is the main insight, and 2 minutes to, how would you make the chart better, and then we'll do a lightning round, quick sharing what ideas you have. Right, I think the conversations are dying down, but so in the interest of time, we'll move us on. I'm sure you have all great ideas. I'm going to show you one example of what I did. I'm not saying this is like the best or the only or the thing you should do, but let me walk you through how you may want to change it. So for example, the main story, as I'm sure you have identified, is that the use of internet, the personal use of internet has doubled or tripled respectively in a decade from 2001 to 2011. Now, the first thing I did is, you can see there's a lot less clutter. I got rid of the quarters, rid of sort of the ugly frame that's not really needed, so we have stripped out that. I had the impression that the middle line, which was just the average between men and women, didn't add any information, because we know men and women are roughly 50-50, so it's just literally the line in between, so we can take this one away. Some improvements to aid understanding, like moving the label from the button right next to the line. Some additional emphasis on the beginning and the end by adding the data label, so it really draws the eye to say, well, why the beginning and why the end. And then lastly, I sort of providing context by referring to the original chart, because that's really what I want to tell you about here. So this is sort of one way of improving the chart, and I'm sure there are many other ones. And as I said, the slide will be available later on, so you can have all the examples and links at your disposal. Now, Let's talk briefly about tools. I made a table. Is that right? Yes, I made a table. So let's start with pen and paper. This is a bit of a joke because no one uses pen and paper. But for sort of completeness, you can draw visualizations with your hands if you're an artist. It's very time consuming. It's not really easy to replicate. It's very error prone. I think the next sort of level up, sort of easy, is spreadsheets. For example, Microsoft Excel. It's familiar to most of us. It's fast. It's quick. Negative cons are perhaps it's limited in its options, and often the problem with Excel is that it's very difficult to understand what someone else did and how to reproduce an example. So this idea of transparency or sort of is with Excel can be a challenge. Then sort of another step up, if you want this commercial software, for example, Tableau. Now these are usually very user-friendly because they're sold. They're usually it's usually easy to customize them or combine different packages that serve your needs. Now the downside is they're professional licenses, and so it can be very expensive, and you're often locked into the universe of IBM or Tableau or whoever's providing them. Then we have open source software, for example R, which is just statistical software, very popular. It is free, so it comes at no cost or no financial cost. It has an incredible amount of support from the community. So you have a question, they often answer you within an hour, for example, on something like Stack Overflow. But on the downside, the learning curve is often very steep, so you need to really explore and sort of get comfortable with programming sometimes. And sometimes the software comes with very specific limitations, maybe a bit better version or stuff like that. And then I think at the end of the pyramid are just programming language like D3, which are extremely flexible. You can do anything you want, and that's what's usually used at those state-of-the-art visualizations like at the New York Times and so forth. They're usually designed to be interactive, which often happen on the web. And the negative sides are very obvious. You need technical skills. Often you need a team that combines different skills. And they sometimes tend to be a bit isolated. By that I mean, if you use a chart in Excel, it immediately links to PowerPoint or Outlook, and it's all its own universe. So this is an overall. What I want to say here is just one size doesn't fit all. Sometimes you want a different tool for different things, so it's not that D3 or R is better than Excel. It's just you would use it in different circumstances. A lot of people said they use Excel, so I have taken a stab and anticipated this. So this is really, this is a site by Juice Analytics, which gives you a lot of free chart templates. And they're quite nice because they look better than the default option. So if you want to enhance, if you want to step up your Excel chart game, then visit that site and you can download them and they're free, and then you can see what they have as sort of templates and play around with it. This is for, pardon me? No, sorry. This is for people that are using R. It's taken from a book that's online called R for Data Science. People who use R will recognize this. This is a very popular data set called CARS. And there's a chapter called Graphics for Communication, which goes into details of how to create labels that don't overlap, how to use the colors, and so forth. Really for people who use R as a reference. And lastly, we come to Data Wrapper. Data Wrapper is an open source tool developed by, I can't remember, but it's open source and anyone can use it. And it really fills that gap of how can I publish a very simple chart, maybe 3 bars on the web without much hassle, that's a little bit interactive, that gives me also the option to provide a link and provide a source and maybe download the data. And that's really what Data Wrapper does, and we're going to now do difficult or dangerous step of sort of live demoing that a little bit. So the website is www.datawrapper.de, and luckily they have some examples preloaded as it were. So usually this is, I would say, the most difficult step. Uploading either as a CSV file or copy and pasting your data here in the right format, but we are in the fortunate position that we're just going to use example here, for example, let's say US trade with the United Kingdom. You can see here, it sort of appears here in what's a seemingly structured format. We go upload and continue. Now we have the opportunity to sort of revise some of the things. For example, the first row is the label. We can say we don't want imports and we could exclude it, or we could say they're in the wrong scale and we want to have them as millions instead of thousands, or stuff like that. We'll just leave it as now. So now we are at the juicy part. So now it's making us the visualization based on that data. So the default option here is line chart, because it's sort of a time trend. So that's why it shows the line. But in principle, you could also use, I don't know, stacked bars. I would say it will also give you some sort of visualization that's not completely wrong. You can see it's the same idea. Or they have other formats like split bars where you now see them next to each other. So they really understand sort of that bars are very basic tools and give you that option too. And then there are loads of options where you can play around. You can refine the chart by saying I want to customize axis, I want to sort different, I want to change the color, I don't know if I do that one. Where it goes, so it has the green. There it is, now it's green, and stuff like that. We can annotate things, imports, exports, whatever you think you want to call it. So now the title should really update. No. Anyway, so you can share anything. I should also say I'm not in any way affiliated. I like it because it is open source, and I like it because it really fills the gap of very easily publishing charts on the web that you can embed and integrate, and it's something that Excel, for example, doesn't really do that well. And then lastly, okay, you can change the design if you want to have it in a more fancy way. But really, and then you go to the publish site, and then if you're logged in, you get the code, and you can just easily copy and paste it into your blog post, for example, and it will give you the thing. Now, let me show you another example here, which is the map, because maps are very powerful and very popular. And for example, here there is what is called a choropleth map. So if we select this, same story. Again, here we have the option to refine or check and control our data. And here it should now create a map that shows you a visualization of the unemployment rate in the US. And you can see so this is how it also will appear on the website. It's interactive. Like if you want to know what's happening in California, 8.7, and you can see here these are very nice touches. It's linked to the original source, so if someone clicks on it, we go to the source. It has a download link to the actual data if someone wants to use and reuse it. And then there's the label, and so forth. So this is really, I encourage you to, if you have a chance, to play around with it yourself, and if you have the need to have interactive charts that may go on your blog post or on your website beyond sort of the static things that appear in reports. What's happening here? I'm just going to run through the resources and then wrap it up because we started a little bit late, and this way we were able to make time. So for people who love checklists, I provided you with a checklist. So I will not go into detail, but essentially there are 6 steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. With some questions of, have you thought of this? Did you think about, do you have enough data to draw a conclusion, and so forth? Did you understand how people reach it or use it, and so forth? So this is not my work, but I linked to it, and you can just, if you find it useful, you can just use it on your own terms. The weight of rain. So this is another data visualization presentation, but it's not really another one because it's outstanding. It's done by a journalist from the New York Times, and so here's the link to the presentation with this actual words, speeches, and it really talks about the aha moment in creating a visualization. Really sort of this, I have all this data and I look at it and then suddenly I discover something new and what that means. And he calls it the weight of rain, but I'm not gonna give you a spoiler why that is. This is really not visual because this is a podcast, but some people who are maybe audiophile want to listen to a podcast. And this is where it talks about, it's a really good example of how to communicate statistics. They have lots of anecdotes, current events, and so forth. And I think there was even an episode where they tried to do visualization over the radio, but generally not recommended. So if you're interested in just hearing more, this is a podcast I would recommend. And lastly, this is just a blog about data visualizations that you can follow that gives you lots of examples. And that's really it. So I would say I have some bonus slides, but I'll leave them to you to explore. So thank you very much.
So what we'll do is we'll run through the presentations and discussions, and then at the end I'll invite everyone back up to the panel to answer some of the questions. So you can take a break now. So I'd now like to invite Nemo Senrit to join me on the podium. He's the Chief Technical Officer of Grow Intelligence, and he joined Grow after spending 8.5 years at Google as a software engineer. And he's the tech lead responsible for Google Ads Exchange. So you can perhaps forgive him as he's moved on to do something perhaps very worthwhile now. And he was saying a little bit about how Grow Intelligence is using data in Africa to encourage investment in agriculture. But I'll let him tell us what.
Okay, so actually we took this slightly different interpretations. Less about investment and more about communicating about agriculture through data. So let me see. Oh, do I have to do anything?
No, you can.
Great. So yeah, so I want to tell you a little bit about Grow Intelligence, what we do, and how our product allows you to tell stories or understand stories related to agricultural data, or using agricultural data. Yeah, so the product that's our main product at Grow Intelligence is called Clues, and it's a web-based software platform that basically makes it easy to discover, examine, and understand agricultural information. More specifically, there's 4 key parts to it, or 4 facets. One is it's a single destination, so we get information from a huge range of sources and bring it to you in one place so you can easily access it. Second, we create a common language or a classification system to give it meaning. So, or technically a semantic ontology is to say, apples and apples and oranges and oranges. So giving the data some meaning. And then third, we have intelligence. So you take that data, apply analytics, computation to it, and hopefully get understanding and insights into what's really going on in a market or in a crop or in a region. And last but not least, as we just heard, data is only as good as your ability to consume it, so intuitive design, visualization is a really important part of it, because a lot of this is very large amounts of data. So we think we have a product that that's suitable for both experts and non-experts to manage a lot of information. So just a brief overview of what are the types of information we have. So it's all related to food and agriculture. So naturally, the first thing people think of is weather and climate, temperature, rainfall, and satellite data, and so on. So that's definitely a huge part of it, and there's a lot of that. And we'll go through some of those. But it's also environmental indicators like vegetation. Over there on the right, you can see there's a whole category of that, where evaporation, vegetation, those kinds of things. But also economic data, supply, demand, trade, import, export, prices, as well as more general things like demographics, macroeconomic indicators, GDP, a lot of things that help you understand what's really going on, and not just the farming aspect of it. And of course, and actually interestingly, there's also infrastructure is a big part of it, storage facilities, transportation, and so on. So understanding data around all these things is really what you need to understand what's going on in agriculture. So in the next portion, I will show you through screenshots, but we also, if there's time, we can do a live demo, how you can use clues to understand a few different stories of things that have happened in the recent past. So story number one is about maize or corn in Tanzania. So these are headlines from the last year. So yeah, shortages, high price, maybe it's corn is being substituted by other foods, a lot of factors going on. It's also a fact that Tanzania is a significant player in the international market, so what's going on with corn in Tanzania affects other countries as well. So how would you get behind these headlines? So, you can read those stories. I'm just using the example. So you would go into clues and you would build what we call a display. So it's basically a dashboard. And from all these sources I mentioned before, you can create various kinds of visualizations. So here we have production quantity of corn, crop calendars, meaning what time of year corn grows. This is comparing a few countries. And I'll get into these in a little more detail later, but this shows you demographics. This shows you trade, export data, basically the market share of different countries in Africa in terms of what percentage of the total exports they represent. And this, you can animate these over time, so you get an idea of their market share. This is also production of a different set of quantities. Here you have prices, and then also corn plus other cereals. So you can also compare if there's substitutions or so on by looking at broader categories. So let's jump in a little bit. So here we have Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Burundi, and Rwanda's production of corn going back to 1960. And so one thing that jumps out, before diving into the current story, you want to understand the big picture long term. So jumps out that Tanzania is that purple curve. So over the last 55 years, Tanzania has really increased a lot, especially in the last 10 years, as you can see, relative to its neighbors. So big production of corn, big increase in production of corn. But then maybe you want to give it a little bit more context. You see those curves up there are population with Kenya for comparison. So you the Tanzania and Kenya population and corn production. So yes, corn production increased a lot in the last 10 years, but really it's more or less keeping up with population growth. So there's often many facets that matter. So here, this is the chart I was showing earlier with exporters. So in this type of visualization, this is called a tree map. The areas of the different squares represent the shares of different countries. So this is total corn exports from Africa in 2002. And one country, South Africa, is pretty much the whole, all of it, right? I think it's 90-something%. Then you jump forward to 2016. This 2016. And you see South Africa is still significant, but it's about half. Other countries like Zambia and Tanzania have really become significant exporters. So their connections to the rest of the world have changed pretty dramatically. Now you might think, okay, well this is shares, percentages, so it could be that just South Africa's production shrunk rather than the others increasing, but then you just look at that over time and that's not the case. The green curve is South Africa, so it goes up and down, but it's still a very large producer, and you can see that the increase in share from Tanzania, for example, is actually not just relative, but also absolute. So let's go back to those headlines in 2016. Prices, this shows you prices, which I guess is the final consequence of all the things that happen. And these are market prices, wholesale market prices from different places in Tanzania, so very local data. And you see in this case, this chart is showing them on a monthly basis, but you can get these down to weekly, depending on the markets when they actually operate. So as you can see, it's if we just step back for a second, and you might have noticed this in the last few slides, the headlines are about this bit here. So from 2000, even though there's this huge upward trend, in 2015 and 2016, it's gone down, and that's the big story that everybody's concerned about. And sure enough, you see that prices kind of reflect that. 2014, which was the high year, prices are relatively low, and 2015 they shot up. And another interesting fact you can see is between different parts of the country, it's you have. It goes from 500 to 800 shillings per kilo. So yeah, you can have what's that, like 60% changes, differences between different parts of the country. Presumably that's transportation or where being close or far away from where the corn is grown. So that's a consistent difference. But what's interesting is that the prices go back down in 2016, even though production continued to go down, as you can see here. So what's going on? Maybe there's other crops that are compensating for corn. So then if you were interested in that hypothesis, you'd look at total cereals and see that total cereals went down. If you remember from the previous chart, I won't go back, but the corn was, I think, it dropped from like 7 to 5 million tons. Here it drops total cereals from 11 to 9. So you can get a sense that, hey, the other cereals did not drop, so corn is the one that dropped. Now, let's dig into a little bit of the fundamentals. So what are the things that affect the production of corn? And let's see if we can understand why it dropped. So this is rainfall. Again, pretty localized down to different parts of the country. These are districts, so the equivalent of counties in the US. And in each county, because it's satellite data, we have very granular. This particular data series is actually daily, but here we're summarizing it on a monthly level. But if you look at those 2 years, the rainfall has shown some interesting information. So this is rainfall anomaly. So 0 means it's average for that location compared to the average over the last 10 years. If it's positive, it means it's more than average. Negative, it means less than average. And the crucial bit to understand is that there's a crop calendar here which shows you that corn is planted in January and February in Tanzania, grows in April, May, and then it's harvested in June and July. So when the rain occurs is very important. And I hope there are no agronomists in the room, because I'm going to, but if there are, please correct me. But I think rainfall is important early in the life of the plant. So here you look at what's going on in January 2016. That's surprising. There's a lot of rain, unusually high amount of rain, but we just saw there was a drought. So that's kind of surprising. But then you see February is extremely low. So maybe if you're just looking at total quantity, you'd think it would be a good year, but the fact that January is high and February is low is probably actually a bad thing. Because they're both extremes if you compare to the same time period in previous years. So this is showing you the same thing spatially, and you can animate these in the product, and it will show you over time an animation of a choropleth map, as we just heard, showing the rainfall levels in different parts of the country. Again, this is an anomaly. So white means normal, blue means above, red means less rain than normal. And as you can see, yes, January had unusually high rainfall, but February was bad. So if you animate this, you'd see that February would be relatively red. Now, what does that mean? So again, we care about what the corn plants are going to do later on. So how healthy are they going to be when they're about to be harvested? So for that, you would want to see something called NDVI, or vegetation index. So this is a satellite signal computed from visible light and infrared, but it basically tells you how green it is at each point on Earth. And this is in June 2016. So around just when the harvest is supposed to start. So this is when you want the plants to be very green, or lots of the vegetation to be very healthy, because that's the end when you're about to harvest it. And as you can see, again, this is an anomaly. So white means normal, orange means below, and green means above. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of orange in the north and west part of the country, but right around the middle is kind of green. So what does that mean for corn? Well, this is just vegetation in general. So you would want to look at this, which is showing you cropland. This is where the farms are. So the dark green is where the land is almost all farms. White is there's no farms. So it could be forests or whatever non-agricultural land. So as you see, the northwest, where it was kind of dry, is actually where a lot of the crops are. I think if there are any Tanzanians, please correct me. But Dodoma, around the middle, below, just below Dodoma, and around here, if you remember, the plants looked healthy, but they're not agricultural crops, so it didn't help. So that's, and then here's another signal, which we talked about January and February. So this is evapotranspiration anomalies. So evapotranspiration is basically how much vapor is coming out of the plants. So they're sweating, water is coming out of them, and it's a bit complicated. But essentially, if there isn't enough rain, the stored water comes out. They sweat. So and here this is February, so you can see that transpiration is unusually high, which means it's a sign that maybe the rain is not enough at the time when the plants need it. So the evapotranspiration is kind of like a reservoir of rain, and so the fact that this is high means that the plants are maybe not doing great. So story number 2 is wheat in Egypt. So again, a bunch of headlines, lots of stories going on in the last year or so about wheat in Egypt, policy questions, production questions, and so on. So this is what you might want to do, and just for illustration purposes, to understand what's going on behind those headlines. So down here you have, an interesting chart, which is price in Egypt and price in the US of wheat. In this case, the data comes from, I believe, the World Bank and FAO. All of this comes from many different sources. But the interesting thing is that, so international prices go up, British prices go up as well. But over here, when the US price dropped down, the Egypt price doesn't drop down as much. So it's sort of there's some delay, and you can see that pattern earlier as well. When there's a spike, it spikes in Egypt, but then it doesn't go down as fast as it does elsewhere. So who knows? But that's some interesting aspect. Now let's see if we can understand that a little better, or maybe see what else is going on. So real quick, this is just showing you when, so Egypt, I forgot to mention, but many people know, Egypt is the world's largest importer of wheat. So it's a very, very significant player. And this shows you when, but it also produces wheat, a significant amount of wheat. So here you see the growing seasons in Egypt, India, and China, specific provinces. And you can see that, well, you know, so this planting starts a little bit earlier in China, and the growth is a little bit longer, etc. But I guess if you were buying, you would care a lot about when the harvests come. So they're staggered, and it's interesting to see where it's being produced. So back to the crisis or situation with wheat. As you can see here, this is import quantity. So I mentioned Egypt is a large importer. So we have a 2 y-axis situation here. Sorry, it's actually, I think it's right in this case. But on the left, so you see the value of the imports is around 5 billion, and the blue curve is showing you the quantity. And you can see that in 2011, the import quantity dropped sharply, although the dollar value went up a lot. And if you remember that price chart, that explains it. So prices shot up. The imports, you know, they're spending more money but getting less wheat for it, and that was a problem. And actually, this is what we call a balance sheet. This is visualization. So it's, you know, just like an accounting balance sheet. It's an accounting for a crop, in this case wheat. In Egypt, you have supply, demand, stocks, and very detailed information year by year. But I won't obviously get into the numbers, but you can clearly see here a huge drop in production in 2010, which we saw. And then if you look at the next row below, you see the corresponding spike in imports the following year. So which now it starts to make sense, because the food, the wheat that was produced in 2010 was going to be eaten in 2011, I guess, and there wasn't enough, so imports had to go up the following year. And you can see kind of the same effect here. The purple curve is the production. When it dips, it's followed by a spike in imports the following year. So that gives you a little bit of insight into the fundamental forces. And then, of course, crucial is that the demand, the blue curve, doesn't change. I mean, it just keeps growing. So the supply shocks have a significant effect. So 2010 was a supply shock. It had enormous consequences for Egypt in 2011, as we all know. So let's see so the imports are a key factor here. Where do they come from? You would see that this is 2000. The colors represent different continents. Egypt was importing mostly from North America, the US in particular. That's the green brick box. And then purple is Europe, orange is Australia. And then you fast forward to 2015 or 13, and suddenly Europe has increased a lot. So Ukraine, Russia, Romania, and the US has shrunk. So it's just, if you can imagine using exchange rates and so on to get a much deeper understanding of how the trade impacts the situation there. So now let's switch gears to a third story, which is most people in agriculture in the US know that 2012 was an exceptionally bad year for corn. So it's an interesting case to look at. But I'll just breeze through it very quickly. One thing, the first curve here is yields. So how much corn is produced per acre of farmland. And you can see that obviously there's a huge increase over time. It's tripled over the last 50 years, I think. So, progress in the crops and so on. But 2012, it dipped by a huge amount. And you see here prices shot up. So I'll skip a little bit of the details. But bottom line is, if you went through the same exercise, you see here in the corn belt, which is where 85% of the corn is grown, in July, I think that's July, yeah. In July 2012, which is right in the middle of the growth period, it was very bad. everything. And just to give you an idea, on the previous picture, a normal year would look like that picture on the bottom right corner. Some areas are a little more, some areas are a little less, and white means everything, things are more or less average. And so that's what a normal year looks like in July. This is what 2012 looks like. So it was uniformly terrible in the Corn Belt, which explains the yield drops. Even though the amount of area used for growing corn was the same, the yield was much lower, so the production was much lower. And this gets you the balance sheet view with very detailed things here. And then one last thing there is basically, in this example, this is a very new thing that we've just launched recently. The last column there is a prediction. All of this, what we've been looking at, is visualizing and understanding trends and what's going on. Now we can use that with machine learning to do forecasts. So that is Grow Intelligence's forecast of what yield, corn yields will be in the US this year. So so it's going to be, we think it's going to be a historic, the highest yields ever. And that's the estimate of the yields and production quantity. So again, basically by putting all this information together, hopefully you get an understanding and insights into what's behind the headlines and what the real story is. And the data helps you looking back, but also in this, as we should see in this last little bit, you can actually also try to predict the future. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Nemo. As we said, the idea of these sessions was to really see what was happening on the ground. I'd like to now invite Natasha Manko and Machiri Nayaga to say a little bit about how data journalism is happening. And Natasha is from the National Agriculture Information Service, while Machiri is Executive Director of the Local Development Research Institute based in Kenya. And I'd say we started off kind of just stepping in the waters. I think in the last session we were up to our neck. Now we'll come back and see how the news side of things goes too.
Good afternoon. So thank you, Chris. You did a decent job at pronouncing my name. You've probably done the best job of anyone here this week. So good job. Yes. So Mushiri Nyakas is my name. Mushiri is the most common of the two. I used to be called Nicholas, but I rebranded. I still like the name though. It means the victorious one. The Greek root for it is Nike. You see where I'm coming from? My name has great stock. So I just talk a little bit about what we've been doing, but I'll tell you a bit of the context. Local Development Research Institute is an action-oriented think tank. We're based in Nairobi. We're about 18 months old, thereabouts. We are focused primarily on how African governments implement the normative frameworks on the continent. So we look at that from the way that the aspirations of the continent have been worded within all these normative frameworks. And a couple of things are really important to us and I expect important to everyone. One is, as a continent, Africa is committed to citizen-driven, people-centered development. You find it in the Constitutive Act of the African Union, which is like the constitution of the continent. And then you find it in a lot of the other treaties and protocols on the continent, from those on the rights of elderly persons to the rights of women, to youth. The people-centeredness remains a very consistent part of the narrative for the direction the company is taking. The second thing that you will find is evidence-centered or evidence-driven decision making. So there's consequently a lot of effort that's gone in to try and make that happen in every single one of the African Union member states. And at LDRI, we see our role as supporting that, essentially the data, the evidence side of it, the capacity of the state to generate and use, disseminate the data, but consequently also the role of non-state actors, not only in keeping the government accountable, but in also using evidence to empower citizens, to enable them to make decisions. So we see the role of media as a constituency within the broader non-state actors as extremely important, because the media is part of this info-media community. And they do a number of things that they do them really well. One is, of course, the fact that they educate citizens, they facilitate conversations, and they amplify voices. And they do that in ways the state doesn't have a budget to do in many of our countries. If you think right in the US, how much the US government has put in a budget for communications to drown out some of the rhetoric coming from one of the election, the presidential aspirants, that would be a huge amount of money, and I'm sure the state would rather use that money to do something else. So the context then for our work is how do we support agricultural development on the continent, and Africa's agricultural development agenda is contained within a program. It's not really a program, it's called a program, but that's, we got stuck with a P in the program, and now we have to say it's not a program every time we say it, but it's called the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. It's more than a program. And what happens with the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, called GODAN in short, is that it's domesticated in African countries through the development implementation of this is our core agenda for how the continent moves forward. So agriculture is really, really important to us. And of course the media is, for us as LDRI, the way we see it is very central. So some of the things we've been doing at LDRI is spending time on capacity building for data within the media. So some of the things we have today, from the data visualizations, we had Grow Intelligence at our last workshop, which was extremely exciting. I'm a big fan of that. And we had a chance to work with 9 journalists from 9 African countries, and we had an opportunity to see how that works, that plays out once they've left the room. And Natasha is here, she can say a bit about what that means for her. And then we're just going to have a really good discussion about it. So I'd like to invite Natasha Mhango to join me up here. She'll talk a little bit about what she's doing and life in Zambia.
As already introduced, my name is Natasha Mhango. I'm a journalist with the National Agricultural Information Services, and this is a unit under the Ministry of Agriculture. It's the media wing, and the Ministry of Agriculture is basically the only ministry in the country which has its own media wing. And our target audience primarily is small-scale farmers. Our mandate is to inform and educate small-scale farmers, especially on adaptation practices. Agriculture in Zambia is mainly rain-fed, meaning that we're very sensitive to changes in the climate. So as agricultural journalists now, the coming years, in the past years, our mandate is to try and inform farmers on best farming practices, which can easily be adaptable and ensure food security at household level. So I participated, or rather I was lucky to be selected among the 9 journalists who underwent the open data training in Nairobi, and Mchiri was our trainer. It was something very new for us because I think most journalists are used to the kind of he said, she said kind of reporting. So open data means now journalists have to do a little bit more homework in terms of researching and articulating this information in such a way that the small-scale farmers can understand it. So I come from a country where data is collected more or less, I wouldn't say it's consistently, but it is collected often, and accessibility, especially to journalists, isn't so easy. I'm in the Ministry of Agriculture. For me, it's easy to access open data from the ministry, but for colleagues who are more in the mainstream media, private sector, accessing this data isn't really easy. And inclusive of that as well is the fact that capacity building is still a major factor. We have all this data. Journalists aren't very good at using it, and I'm glad that Clues gave an example of maize production in Tanzania, because this farming season we had a similar situation where government is telling us we have a bumper harvest. They're giving us reports, consistently, every month, telling us food security, we're food secure, we have a bumper harvest. A few months later, we had a serious shortage of maize flour, which is basically the heart of every Southern African. And with this shortage came increase in food prices. Journalists were at pains to try and explain to the public how, on the one hand, we have a bumper harvest, on the other hand, we have a shortage of food. The data was available, but most journalists failed to use it. So personally, I really appreciate the training that I've undergone. It's really changed the way that I report and present my data to the small-scale farmers, especially since the farmer, between me and the farmer is the expert. They're the ones who know more. They're the ones who pretty much understand a little bit more than I do. So I think training like this is very important to journalists. And looking at the rate at which agriculture is going, especially in Africa, the fact that the AU through CADEP is trying to boost or rather transform agriculture, I think open data is proving to be an important skill that most journalists need to have. Thank you very much.
One of the things that, because we've talked about communicating data and kind of putting this complex information in ways that people can understand really easily. I think maybe Natasha could talk just for a couple of minutes. I think this is moving a bit fast. Maybe a little bit about, who are these farmers? Because these farmers they're your core constituents, right? They're your main audience. But what are they like? Because maybe out here a farmer looks a bit different. Right, Amasi Ferguson wears sunglasses.
Well, small-scale farmer in Zambia, we're talking about peasant farmer who has minimum, I would say, half a hectare of land is what they use. The reason they're important is because 60% of the food that is eaten in Zambia is produced by the small-scale farmer. So that is what makes them the most important of our audience. And these are people who are, with time, I think most of them have basic education, meaning they're able to read and write, basically, not so that they can articulate very, sophisticated, high-content data, but they're able to at least understand something which is written in English. So those are the kind of people that I deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so it was important to bring that up, partly because within the space that we've been working with people like me and Nemo and Savage and, sorry for the name, and Audrey, we're used to, some of the visualizations we work with, chloroplates, scatter graphs, charts with multiple Ys. I mean, we know how to deal with this. But if you take one of those charts into rural Malawi, rural Zambia, rural Kenya, rural Ethiopia, and ask any, someone with basic education, to explain what's going on, they know there's a line that's moving in that direction, or there's a whole lot of pecky things. Someone's dropped coffee on this thing, it's got too many spots, but what that actually means would be lost. So that means we need to take the conversation about visualizing data a little bit in a slightly different direction, in addition to what we're talking about here. And one of the things that we've been talking about, excuse me, with some of our journalists, is going back and using what has always worked. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. One of the things that's really worked is editorial cartoons. And they're still working in many parts of the Western world. Even now, I still see editorial cartoons from the New Yorker. It means they're still being consumed in the US. And they are a very important tool for getting a very complex idea out, enough to start a conversation. So we're talking about, for instance, the cartoons that we have of this fat cat sitting on some money, and the peasant farmer, holding a little money, and then, next image shows, a bit later, and the fat cat is much fatter, sitting on a whole lot more money, and the peasant farmer is a whole lot thinner, holding nothing but a single banknote. That is a visualization. It shows you a trend, shows you some element of context and volumes, and they don't need to know the very nitty-gritty macroeconomics of how wealth moves within the economy. All they need to know is there's some inequality going on here. We need to talk about it. So that's one of the things I'd like to leave you with, because I could go on forever. And of course, I'm sure some of you have some questions. So I'll stop there. All right, Chris, I think this is about where you stop me.
Don't worry, you will get the chance to ask questions when I invite the panel back at the end. Just like to move to our last speaker, Nailam Prasai. She's the data curator at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington. And here they're handling a lot of that data that's been discussed earlier, particularly in the last point about the data around CADEP. And when setting these policy indicators, what statistics are available to hold the countries to account and to compare and contrast between countries.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Neelam, and working at the Communication and Knowledge Management Division at IFPRI, International Food Policy Research Institute. Today, I'll be focusing mostly on IFPRI's experiences on making data talk. Let me first begin in introducing IFPRI with you. IFPRI is an organization that provides research-based policy solutions to reduce poverty and end hunger and malnutrition in developing countries. Creating, analyzing, sharing, and communicating data are all equally important steps to achieve IFPRI's vision of a world without hunger and malnutrition. Today, I'll be focusing more around data sharing and communicating at IFPRI. IFPRI has been collecting and analyzing data since its inception in 1975. But we started sharing data publicly only around early 1990s, roughly around 50 years later after we started publishing research monographs, journal articles, and discussion papers. The first data policy centered on supporting and publishing data as public goods was institutionalized in 2005. Since then, we have been regularly visiting our data policy to confirm the data governance structure, best practices, emerging technology, and demands that we face in our day-to-day work. Most of the time, we distribute these data sets from the digital repository, and we are also distributing our data from different various portals, like we are also right now working with Agris, and there are other portals in the Dataverse itself. And most of the time, we automated our process of sharing the data through these outlets. But still, we are manually inputting our metadata in some of the outlets so that it can get to many more people that we want to target. And our data repository is growing every year. Currently, we have roughly around 227 data sets for you to use at your disposal. And it's free and it's openly available for you to use. Once we create a record in the repository, we make interconnections between different literature and related data that we can connect. And depending upon the scale of representativeness of the data, we also run a communication campaign around it. This includes writing a blog, talking about them in newsletters, targeting both internal and external audiences, and using social media like Twitter and Facebook. Are we done? No. We are just sharing the existence of data. Facilitating the discovery and easing the access. Not yet, we are not done here yet. We are highly engaged in bringing data to life, making data talk to get the message to the targeted audience that we want to reach. But how do we do that? Through data visualizations. As to other organizations, static infographics, charts, bar charts, maps, and the like is a massive component of the data visualization at IFPRI. But with the changing dynamics of the audience and the evolving point-and-click data visualization software like Tableau, ArcGIS Online, Mapbox, efforts are being geared to create more interactive dynamic visualization at IFPRI. We have visualizations ranging from single messaging to platform-based. Depending on the need and demand, we are also creating multiple visualizations coming out of the same product, targeting different audiences and needs. And I want to share some of the select examples as an effort of IFPRI's data visualization team. Let me bring you an example, the static infographics as an example for you. It's not coming. Can you project it to the screen, please?
Sir. Sir.
Static infographic that was created for the Global Nutrition Report. So when I was asked to create a map for this infographics, I was handed an Excel table, and basically I deal with the nutrition data most of the time. But then I knew that obesity is a problem, but when I put the data into the map, I was really surprised. I knew that obesity is a problem, but not to the extent as it is revealed in this map. Almost all the countries around the world, they are in orange category. And these static infographics, it served well to the purpose, to our purpose of the message that we are targeting and to the audience that we wanted to target. These infographics was mostly meant for the audiences in the developing countries who do not have access to the internet readily. So this printed map, printed infographics came very handy when we're talking and dealing our message to them. After this static infographics, I want to show you the interactive infographics that we have for the Global Nutrition Report again. It was built with the Tableau, and we have utilized this static graphical component to demonstrate the different form of malnutrition and to tell that child stunting is one form of the malnutrition. And we came up with the storylines in these infographics, interactive infographics. We are telling that 159 million children under 5 are stunted here, and then it is interactive. You can see like how many were stunted and how many were not, and then you can compare between 1990 to 2014. And then after this, we're telling that under 5 stunting is declining everywhere, but not in Africa, and you can see the timeline. And then we are telling about what's the global target to reduce stunting, and then we are also trying to tell under business as usual scenario, we're not able to meet this global target. And then we tell like what are the factors that are affecting the improved nutrition. And then we show all these indicators that are probably the underlying drivers for the improved nutrition. And then below we show the country's vulnerabilities based on under how countries categorize on those 6 drivers for improved nutrition. And here, if you see here, United States has 1 vulnerability. And dark green means 0, light green means 1, and then similarly the orange, and the darker the color, the more the problem is. And then below, we saw how the country are performing, whether the country are on track or not to meet their global targets for stunting. This is one example of the interactive graph that we created in IFPRI. And I also want to show you to the another interactive graphic that we have created for the Global Hunger Index report. This is the web app that we created for Global Hunger Index report. It contains map, rankings, and then we also talk about the results and the result tab, methodology, and then we have another application. This actually materialized in the process of creating something new than what we've been doing regularly for GHI. And what we used to regularly do for GHI is to create the map in the Tableau. And we still did that for last year, but then we took different approach. We adopted the storyboard approach to tell a story for the Global Hunger Index report. And then we published both of these. And then later, after almost like 1 year, last month only, we analyzed our use metrics for this, for both of these applications, and here is what we have found. This GHI web app is mostly used by nonprofits and policy advocates. And this Tableau storyboard, it's mostly used by data journalists and data geeks. And we have also found that the data geeks have used this data, this visualization, to come up with their own visualization, and then they have mixed this data with other data and have created different visualization and just different lists than what we are telling here. And after this, I want you to show you IFPRI Food Policy Atlas. This is the visualization platform from the Telmap software. And here what we can do is we can create visualization, have narratives, have the bar charts, compare countries across different multiple indicators. And right now it's still evolving, we are still working on it. We have food policy indicators and global nutrition report indicators. But right now I would like to take you to the food policy report here. Food policy indicators, basically not the report. We have a couple of indicators here. And out of these, let's take one per se, agriculture productivity, or even agriculture science and technology indicators. And then here you can see the map, you can see the rankings, and then we have short narratives over here. This is one small example, and then if you go back in the topic page again, where here also we have this map, and then we also give like brief explanation what the map is telling for the agriculture total factor productivity and how countries are ranking in terms of the values. and the narratives down here. And then it also provides how we can compare countries along the different time frame. And the beauty of this platform is you can access the country profiles, per se Afghanistan here, and then it will compare all these different indicators that we have here for Afghanistan. So we have been using various kind of tools. We also use Google Charts, and basically what we have learned so far throughout this process is basically what kind of tool that we use depends upon the message that whom we are targeting and what kind of message basically. And the other thing in the process, what we have learned is it is also important to train and sensitize researchers about the importance of communicating data. We still need to get their time to understand what they are trying to communicate to the larger audience, and basically who the audiences are. Is it the researchers? Is it the policy makers? Is it the general lay audiences? And then depending upon the different audience group and what message we are trying to deliver, multiple approaches can be used. The same thing as I showed you earlier. For example, when we were designing this web app, we didn't know that the users of this web app would be mostly non-profits and policy advocates. But when we analyzed this data, we learned that this kind of app mostly serves non-profit organization and policy advocates. So we can, who we want to basically target, depending on that, we can use different kind of tools to target that business. And then for an organization like ours, where not everyone is a programmer, point-and-click tool could be a good start. And it is easier to learn. It comes very handy, and then just like within one click, we can publish it in the web. It's interactive, time-saving. And when we have to customize our data visualizations for specific needs, then this one is actually based on open source code from Journalism++. And optimizing the use of open source code is very helpful and time-saving and labor-saving. With this, I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks very much indeed, Nana. I think we've heard a variety of approaches to communication, but we may not have heard all. There's many of you in the room concerned exactly with this topic. So I'd like to open the floor up for questions. If the other speakers would like to just sit up around the panel, then if we've got specific questions that could be answered by them, we'll put them to the panel.
I'll wait for the panel.
Yeah.
So I should start on a personal note. My studies in undergraduate was history of science, medicine, and public health. So the Broad Street Pump is a great example, and I was really pleased to see that. Having written an assignment at like 1 in the morning on it, it was great to see the sort of vindication of the effort and being able to recognize it. I actually wanted to share 2 points actually related to that story, and then pose a question to the panel, a slightly provocative one. So the first point is the Broad Street Pump example is actually really great at emphasizing another point that's emerging from this conference, which is the need for up-to-date data. As it's been later shown, when Jon Snow started to actually record cases of cholera in Chelsea, the epidemic was actually waning, and that had the data been available earlier, and that he had done the action that he had ultimately done, which was to disable the pump, that more lives could have been saved, and there could have been further cases of cholera prevented. So it's a very germane example for another reason. The second story that I think is relevant from the Broad Street Pump example is that when Jon Snow took the findings to city officials, they were very reticent to actually implement any action. It was the only pump in the area, and that there would have been pushback if they had shut it down. So Jon Snow did something that was very reckless. He disabled the pump himself. And when it was reinstalled, he disabled it again. Since then, he's been commemorated by a pub that's actually right next door to the Broad Street pump. But what I think is important about the story is that the data mobilized him to take action, or at least to encourage other people to take action, and when that was impossible, he took action himself. I'm not encouraging all of us to become anarchists and to tear down systems of government, but I do think that it's important that as a data visualizer, he saw that there was a need to act on data. And so I guess my provocative question is this: to what extent, as we as data visualizers have focused most on outputs, such as beautiful dashboards, at the expense of focusing on outcomes and what actually is done with the outputs that we create? And sort of thinking about it philosophically, we describe dashboards as tools, which made me wonder to what extent is a tool if it's not actually utilized, and if it serves a function that we envision but is not actually seen in the field. I think, sort of present company excluded, the work that was being presented, sorry, I'm getting this first. As we heard from the panel, the work that you're doing is actually really impactful and has clear use cases. But I wonder to what extent, when we sort of sit down to build dashboards or data visualizations, are we thinking more about creating an output than we are an outcome? So I'd love to hear more about your sort of thoughts and perspectives on that sort of tricky dichotomy.
The current portion of the current or the data being up to date, I think we didn't really emphasize it, but that is a huge part. All the data that we have, in our case, is data that's changing all the time. And in fact, most of the time, when you start back the most recent data, you're trying to understand something or just exploring things. So yeah, I mean, and that is a large part of the value that we provide, I think, because if the information that's out there would take a long time to be available. There's tags and various sources, or somebody has to interpret it and write reports and produce it. So kind of automating that and having a timely manner means, yes, you get it in time to act on it, hopefully. The other piece, visualization versus outcome, I think, yeah, that's really interesting. I think this is part, so in our case, it's still early, so we'll see, but we hope to have a huge impact on a lot of things. Journalists, for example, being able to use this tool to tell stories, people trying to understand. So that's why we try to create, and I hope these examples show that these things are related around a question or an insight or trying to actually understand something and make it actionable rather than just, let's look at all the data that's available for this place. It should just be like maybe it's very pretty, but it would just be a data dump. So we're trying to focus, we try to make our examples really based on stories, issues, problems, insights, things that you're trying to understand. But also, I think Sarah, our CEO, likes to say we do 80 or 90% of the work, but the other 10% is you, right? So at the end of the day, we want to give people understanding and insights, but and empower them to do what they want. But we are not going to be the actors. We're providing that tool. But yeah, so I think it's the critical issue. That's what we're trying. That's how we have to have an impact, is to make our data, the platform easy to sort of answer questions, get insights, as opposed to just plotting stuff.
I will answer my response mostly to the last three components for the data visualization. There is always balance that we have to think about, but then think about people normally eat with their eyes, even before testing the food. So I think that it has to be beautiful. We need to be able to get people's attention to whatever visualization that we will create. So that's the first input. But there is always a balance. But then in order to make the data beautiful, present it beautifully, we should not compromise the message that we are trying to tell through the dashboard, interactive graphics, or whatever it be. And in terms of the outcome, just through the visualization, we haven't tracked that. But then in terms of output, I think we have seen impact. For example, if you look into the Tableau dashboard that we have created, it has reached out to many people in terms of the views. For example, for the GHI, snapshot of hunger around the world, it has more than 60,000 views. And I'm thinking with that number of views, at least we have been able to raise awareness among people. And that is also a impact from my point of view.
So I think the outcome question, is one that really resonates with me and my co-founder at LTRI, because we tend to start from the end. So for instance, our primary audience has been the multilateral institutions on the continent. And then, and we're trying to make our way down into member states. So the conversations that we have with ministers and senior government officials around data tend to be high. They'll be looking for high utility. So we would start with what's the indicator that's being tracked? What are they trying to achieve? So if you're trying to drive down hunger, then we're asking if it's a dashboard, then what do you need to see in order to make your course-correcting decisions? What kind of data, which department would be producing the data, how would it be shared, we need to get it on time. So for instance, for the GODAN challenge, the project we pitched is essentially along those lines, an agriculture sector data coordination framework. And we're asking, how do you make sure that the velocity of the data, its velocity, its volume, its cadence, all work together to make sure that decisions can be made quickly. And that means that the visualizations that have to be at the forefront for senior government officials need to be those that have high utility for them. So the output for us wouldn't be the visualization. And it's not about the visualization. If there's a way of getting a group of improv actors to check into the cabinet secretary's, the minister's office every morning and act out for him, what's going on with the data, and achieve the same outcome, then we'll do that. We'll do improv. But that's the options for us. Start with the end. What are we trying to do? And then provide a tool, something that has high utility for the person who has to make a decision. So if you look at media, it's kind of the same thing. What kind of stories are they? What kind of stories is the journalist trying to tell? Who's the audience? Is this the right tool? Is this the right platform? If you're trying to reach rural farmers with low internet access, then maybe Tableau or Data Wrapper might not be ideal. Maybe you want a flat, printable infographic to work with. That's essentially the short version. And
just to add on, maybe like Neelam said in her presentation, usually the visualizations of data depend on the audience that you're speaking to. So if you're going to look at, for example, small-scale farmers and you're trying to advocate for better farming practices, obviously you're going to visualize it in such a way that as a layperson, he's able to understand the message and he's able to be persuaded from what he sees rather than presenting, a big document of trends of production over years and so on.
Yeah, sure. And forgive me, I may have missed this in the first two speakers. But a lot of the types of communication that I heard about were primarily things targeting like online, web, a bit of print. But thinking particularly around the challenge of engaging, and you guys I think talked a little bit about this in your presentation with Shiri, around engaging smallholder farmers, particularly offline. What are the types of things that the panel has found have been most effective in communicating with the audiences in those channels, and then also measuring the effectiveness of that communication with those audiences? Thank you.
A couple of questions together and then we'll ask the panel. So, can I take two more questions? Sorry, we are a little pushed for time because we started late.
So my question is kind of tied to his. You said that one of the ways that you reach small-scale farmers is through cartoons, and getting them to, getting the message across through cartoons. My question is around how do you, first of all, broadly disseminate that information? I mean, not everyone buys a newspaper, for example. Secondly, how do you ensure that, because, I mean, cartoons are great and everyone gets them, but to pass along more complex data to get them, like, to get farmers information that they can actually, I mean, it's good. I feel like cartoons are more reactive kind of forms of, communicating stuff. So this is what happened when Zambian corn, there was a drought, and this is why your harvest was poor, for example. How do you get them information that is kind of action, like they can take action on that information that is not just a cartoon? And how do you get them to a point where they're competing with, I mean, African small-scale farmers are competing with small-scale farmers all over the world. I mean, I feel like cartoons are great, they're funny, but how do you get complex information across to, the small-scale farmers?
Hi, so we're building a data visualization tool for model outputs, and so that I think it's in a little bit of a different realm than what we've seen before, but one of the things that we've come across is how do we visualize uncertainty? How do we visualize a range of results, not just a number, and do it in a way so that someone who doesn't know about models, doesn't care about the methodology, but still needs to know that there is not just one answer, but several stories that lead to a range of answers. And I'm just wondering if anybody's had any experience doing that, and maybe you could share that and help us do it. Thank you.
So the questions we had, that first one about small-scale farmers' communication, not just being online only, and then elaborating on that, this specific example of cartoons. And then that last question about visualizing uncertainty.
Okay, for the communication to farmers, first of all, because we have quite a large number of farmers at the ground, and when it comes to especially print media, most of them don't have access to print media. So that means, first of all, we have to produce the content, and then we have to follow the farmers and take it there to them. So usually we take out our information in the form of very brief brochures, like you said, with cartoons, other times with posters, which pretty much have like a cycle, for example, of production, where you even put the years to say, in this year, this is how it was, in this year, this is how it was. You visualize that in the form of a cartoon. And it's easier for them to follow, even if they don't understand English, because most of the time some of these publications are in English, they're able to follow from the drawings to say, oh, this is what happens, this is what happens. If we don't adapt to this new farming practice, this is what is most likely to happen. And the challenge, though, I must admit, is measuring the effectiveness which was brought out. I think we personally, we're speaking from a Zambian perspective, I think we haven't really measured the effectiveness of most of these messages that go out to farmers. So it's very difficult for us now to tell the impact that it has.
I think Okay, so I cannot conflate my answer. I don't know if it will help, but I hope it does. So you need to think about communicating not using isolated channels, but kind of looking at a channel mix for getting a message across. So the way we see it is, so you use the cartoons, essentially you're doing these caricatures or whatever that are included in material. So you have some text, it's a brochure, it has some imagery in it, but also has a call to action. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So you want them to do something. You want them to use fertilizer. You want them to eat a balanced diet, make sure the child goes to school, wash their hands. So whatever is in the cartoon needs to have a call to action within it at some point. But then again, if you've done it, it's in an editorial for a cartoon, for a newspaper, or it's a poster. But if you leave that chance, you may not get the full effect. So the best approach that I've seen work with some NGOs on the continent in the last few years is taking those messages, running a campaign, working with radio stations, because radio stations radio is still the killer app on the continent. You have more people listening to radio than reading print, even with the sharing behavior with print. Because if you have a circulation of 1 million newspapers, there's a chance that you're reaching 10 million people. Because we have a sharing culture around that. I mean, if you look at, you can see photos of people standing around the newspaper vendor, and they're just standing there, they're not buying, they're just reading a paper and still on the stand. And having a discussion about the headline and coming to conclusions about what the writer should have said. And that just shows you how. And is this a message that you want more of the women to know than the men? Then you want to put the message in a place like the water points. If it's more about the men and it is a community where the men are the ones that deal with the livestock, then you want it in the livestock market. On a tree in the livestock market, or on a notice board or something. At the hospital, in the pediatric unit, notice board, stuff like that. So you kind of have to think about the possible touch points for the human beings, their behaviors, and then connecting that content, putting that content in the place where they're going to be as much as possible. And then figuring out, so the question about then how do you tell if they're being effective or not? If I just go back to the question about outcomes, chances are, you started this thing out at the beginning because you wanted to achieve something. You wanted more fertilizer usage. You wanted to improve your starting numbers somehow. So one of the places you want to look is possibly if there's greater adoption of a certain behavior that you are pushing with your campaign. And that's it may not allow you to make the kind of positive claims, because sometimes the reason why people adopt something or make a change is not because of the communication, maybe because of who else supported the idea and influenced the community and things like that. So there are ways of getting signals, and some of those signals could be whether the numbers have changed, whether you're getting more comments about this on social media, whether you're getting more comments on this on radio in the mornings. But the true test for whether your communication is effective is whether you had the kind of behavior change, the kind of outcomes you're looking for. Because the outputs will give you the complete answer. And then probably just one other thing about radio. So it's one of the trickiest conversations to have when we talk about visualizing data. How do you visualize data for radio? Word pictures are still really important. One of the things that I think we've been talking about exploring is how do you train people to tell those pictures, to use word pictures, to paint, to tell a story on radio that allows people to visualize in their own minds what you're talking about. I had an example a couple of years ago in Kenya where someone told a story on radio trying to explain the scale of waste, because there was a scandal around some leasing of an aircraft. And this guy in the community, it's a small community radio station, and he said talking about the price of maize, a bag of maize, and he said, you know what, if we stack one bag of maize and then another, along this highway all the way to the next town, we still wouldn't have spent all the money that was spent on leasing that aircraft. And this is a community where people were on relief food. So the people got really pissed and made a lot of phone calls, because suddenly they realized, wait, that could feed a village. Because it's a number that they cannot comprehend. $3 million in local currency. So the word pictures on radio, there's no D3 library, there's no coding required, but it does require creativity. Another skill set that we probably want to try and get more journalists and intermediaries, other journalists or civil society, to try and develop. How is something that we're quite good at, and be thrilled to hear who would be trying that.
I do not have much to add on reaching these smallholder farmers offline. I think that is the same what you mentioned just now. Like, we cannot just use the one approach, but it's a rather mix of approaches, and I still think that the radio is the best approach, based on my own experience, because I came from a farming family, and when I was growing up, my parents, they always used to listen to the radio, and still now they are listening to the radio when they are farming. So I think it's still the best ways to reach farmers like my parents. The other question is about how do we present the data visualization so that it goes. I have experience to answer that, in the sense that once I was tasked to present the randomized control trial in the form of the data visualization, and when I was working with the research team, it is very difficult to convince research team not to put everything that they have put in the paper. And then there is always a compromise. Sometimes researchers are very dissatisfied and the project doesn't complete. But then we really have to work hard in trying to convince the researchers that whoever we are targeting, they do not need to know all the components of the research process. We need to tell what they really want to know. So for example, it came out of the research trial that we have done in Burkina Faso, which was actually the evaluation of homestead garden in Burkina Faso. And the homestead garden program was really helpful in reducing the diarrhea in the community where we have the program versus the control area. And it was in percentage point, but then our researchers, they wanted to improve the sampling process. How do we choose control village? How do we choose the villages where we have intervention, things like that. And then we decided to hide all this sampling procedure, and then we only presented the information about the program itself, which is the homestead program, and the different components, like how it was designed and things like that. And then we directly went to the result, rather than focusing on the procedure itself. And the result was basically in the form of the graphs, like how much it was before and how it changed after. And that was the information that came very clearly, and it is very widely used in IPRI whenever we are trying to communicate with our researchers in-house to tell what we want to communicate and who is our target audience.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna talk. I like to quickly address the question on visualizing uncertainty, because, well, I applaud you for thinking about that. It's a great question, and I don't have an answer for you because I don't know what your data looks like. But I have two things that come to mind where I would point you. The first one are, have a look at all the work that's done around election forecasts and interpreting for polls and so forth. For example, the New York Times has a very nice visualization they call spin the wheel, where you can spin the wheel and different results come out every time. 538, they like to show, to get technical, the whole probability space, so they show you like all your different results of a model that runs 10,000 times. And as was mentioned before, I think metaphors are great, so they often compare, they often use sports metaphors. They say, this result is as likely as a footballer hitting the goal from 35 yards, or something like that. And the second point, so this was election forecast, the second point are forecasts from the UN related to population, or also forecasts from the IPCC on climate change. And these models, they usually have like a funnel or these kind of things, and they can be, I think there's a lot of things you can do with colors, different hues, to sort of show, you know, very bright, and sort of, I think you know what I'm talking about. And lastly, I think it really helps to talk to the user and see if they understand.
Yeah, actually, that's a very topical question. I don't know if you saw the last bit of my presentation was a forecast, a yield model forecast. And we're literally this week discussing that topic itself, of how to represent confidence interval or distribution or the degree of certainty around the forecast. And yeah, I think I agree. I think the first thing that comes to mind is opinion polls or political polls, which is something people are used to. Another is also sports. You know, they actually the same example. Conditional probabilities are actually most used in sports. They call them splits. But if you say conditional probability, nobody knows what you're talking about. But if you say splits, at least in America, a lot of people understand exactly what you mean. So this is going to places that people are familiar with is really, I think, the key, but we don't have the answer yet. And then the other thing, I wanted to talk about the fact that these tools are web-based. So our product, you know, I think roughly 3/4 of the world, the people involved in the production of food are not farmers. So our product, you know, could be used by farmers, but that's not the only ones. And you know, whether it's journalists, policymakers, governments, nonprofits, commercial, industrial food producers, and so on. So they have computers, they have the internet. You know, they have cars, they have phones, they travel in airplanes. So I think we need we also need to build things that I think one expression I like, you have to build for the future. So just I'll close with one example. A long time ago, I think in the late 90s, there was a company in Africa for communications saying, well, okay, you know, cell phones are growing in America, and pagers are phasing out, so it would be great if we get pagers to Africans for communication because they can't afford cell phones. By the time the company got off the ground and started doing that, that was irrelevant. Like, everybody in Africa had cell phones. So it's like, it's the same thing here. You know, I don't think we necessarily want to look too far back or assume that people who are in different parts of the world don't need the same level of tools. You just have to build the right ones and make it really useful to them. So, yeah. So one common example we've heard is like, yeah, when we talk to the potential users of our product, it's like, oh yeah, you know, this maybe, you know, the cost or this complexity or cost of using this product, oh, it's kind of like using my satellite TV subscription. Yeah, both in cost and complexity, or their smartphone. So it's not, we don't necessarily, I mean, I understand that there's different levels of understanding, but there's also a huge need to get things that really work and that are cutting edge everywhere.
Thanks very much indeed. Can I ask you to thank the panel and also my colleague Izara Lopez, who's helped put all this together. Thanks very much indeed. You'll need to make your way fairly briskly to the closing plenary at the Grand Ballroom. I assume they have a little delay, but you need to move.
Yeah,